Welcome to the Futurum Tech Podcast, the interview series. My name is Daniel Newman, and I am your host. And I am excited today about this interview that we have going on. We have Maria Morais joining me from SAP. We're going to talk a little bit about retail, the impacts that the pandemic and that the changing forces of our global economy have had on it. A great discussion coming your way. But without further ado, Maria, welcome to the Futurum Tech Podcast interview series. How are you today?
Daniel, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here today. I'm really excited about talking to you about retail and the shifting forces that are having impact in the industry, but also the technology that it's behind all of that. So I'm industry principal at SAP for retail and fashion, and we've been seeing a lot of shifts recently.
Oh, I bet it's been a really interesting time. I've done a lot of interviews here on the podcast, had people from different industries, different spaces, different technologies. And listen, if there's one thing that's been consistent across almost every conversation, it's that people are dealing with change and that chaos has almost replaced normalcy. And so I just feel that people and companies that are doing really well have become really well acquainted with this chaotic shift that we're in. And they're embracing it and they're using it to create new products, new services, new business models. We're going to talk about all that today. So welcome to the show, Maria. I'm really happy to have you here. Where are you, by the way? I think everybody, I used to ask people where you were because, we would talk about travel and events. Well, no one travels anymore. So where is your base? Where are you quarantining, locating, or keeping yourself occupied these days?
So I've been in London quite a lot recently. I used to travel all the time, but no, since the beginning of the year and as things slow down with travel to completely stopping. I'm in London. And
great. I like London. I used to travel too, Maria.
Yeah.
So that was something I used to do. I like to kind of keep these conversations, not too long because I want to make sure all of the people that are listening listen all the way through. But at the same time, I do have a bunch of questions I want to ask you. The overall state, as I sort of alluded to, of retail has been impacted tremendously by COVID-19, by the pandemic, by the lockdowns, by the economic situations that we're in right now. We've seen a few kind of commerce giants like the Amazons of the world exploding and sort of be seen as the beacons of the future of shopping. But you work with a lot of companies and you work with a lot of great companies that are successful, that have continued to be successful, that are adopting and adapting and changing. So I want to lean on that a little bit because I want to make sure that, yes, while we have seen some of the giants grow even larger and been imperative, in the retail space, there's still room. There's still a lot of multi-billion-dollar and large companies that are doing really interesting things. And I think there's a lot of trends going on. So I'd love to get your take on what some of the hottest trends are in retail right now that companies are paying attention to, implementing, leveraging, utilizing in order to prepare their businesses to become both steady and stable and growth oriented as we start to return to a little bit more normalcy.
Yeah, sure. So the trends can be defined as digital maturity. Are you digital mature enough? Yes or no, right? So one of the trends that we see across the board is becoming super evident, the companies that were not investing in becoming customer-centric yet. So for all of the retailers that are still driving their digital transformation based on what they think they need to solve as a specific problem without having that holistic view about digitalization everywhere, it's more difficult for those companies. The companies that were already customer-centric, digitalizing, they are able to embrace the unknown much better than companies that are still thinking in the old ways, right? So we don't talk at SAP about digital transformation only. We think we're really talking about an era of digital acceleration where companies need to embrace digitalization. Not only, it's not enough to have just a commerce website anymore. the B2B side of things, everything that the consumer doesn't see. That's fundamental. And so we've been seeing a lot of companies that were running with spreadsheets and on the phone to run their businesses in everything that is supply management or wholesale management. That is the part that it's being digitalized. And I'm very, very hopeful that that trend continues, because this is what is enabling retailers to become more efficient. And I believe that efficiency is possible in big companies. So you were saying about Amazon and the big retailers doing really well during this phase. Why is that the case? Because they were digital mature. But at the same time, let's not fool ourselves. Grocery just exploded. We couldn't buy groceries online during lockdown, right? So there were not enough slots available. And how is that possible? That is possible because suddenly you had 30-40% more people buying online that were buying in traditional channels. And those people will continue to buy online. And suddenly, oops, retailers have a problem. How do we make sure that we continue with this volume? And even Amazon struggled. I don't know. I've tried to buy food from Amazon Fresh and I couldn't during lockdown period. Am I going to think about them again when I think about grocery? Not really. I'm going to think about who solved my problem.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you point that out. I mean, I don't think there was a company on the planet that didn't deal with some disruption in supply chain at some point during this pandemic. I think you make a great point. There was digital maturity and there was sort of born to be in this moment companies that were just always kind of waiting for that moment when everyone had to do everything online. I mean, that's why your Netflix and Spotify's and social media platforms, it was like we were already using these too much. And then you take most of the global population and tell them they can't leave their house, but these people remained well connected. What do? They went on social media, they went on streaming apps, they shopped online. And so, all those things that I think people have been telling customers, us as tech advisors and tech companies have been telling our customers about optimizing your websites, building your search engine visibility, increasing your marketing and your customer data platforms and 360-degree view of customers. All the things we've been saying for a long time came to fruition. The problem was we were planning to develop these and build these things out with our customers over year, 3, 5, 7, 10 years. And we saw 10 years of acceleration happen in like 10 weeks. And so companies that were really doing this, so you kind of alluded to, we talk about trends, but, things like companies that had already started accelerating workloads with AI and being able to process greater volumes of data, be able to identify patterns and trends, putting the right opportunity in front of the right customer at the right time. We're at a distinct advantage over small retailers or retailers that had not invested and embraced these transformations, because these companies were dependent on more traditional commerce, people walking through a mall or traveling and visiting a certain location. I think about tourism and all the retailers and tours, these small little boutiques. There was no technology. It was 100% dependent on a traditional supply chain. Last summer when I visited Spain, it was like, we were walking around Barcelona, these little small merchants. It was like they're used to millions of Americans and visitors from across Europe and Asia coming into the city every year with money. So, these businesses were wildly disrupted because there was no plan. So, these were obviously exceptions, Maria, but then you have the bigger companies that are just starting to deploy. So you kind of saw the digital haves and the digital have-nots, and then everything in between. And that brings me to my next question for you is, this really has to mean for SAP, as you're advising and working with customers in your role, you have to be talking about changing processes now, because all the technologies I alluded to are only going to be implemented with new platforms, new processes, new service models. Talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing and how you're proposing these things to your customers today.
Yeah, so disruption is definitely something that retailers need to be ready. And some of them have been doing an excellent work in terms of making their infrastructure quite flexible, moving to the cloud, having a microservice type of structure, being really able to design services around what can can be useful for their customers or consumers, as opposed to just think about themselves and how they want to put their service for customers. If you really are customer centric as a retailer, you would not be developing requirements based on what you think it's useful. You really incorporate that data in your requirements gathering. And so continuous innovation or continuous deployment of innovations is something that some retailers were able to achieve. Now, if we look at the segments that were doing this really, really well, I think retailers that tend to, like department stores or retailers that sell multiple brands, somehow have their supply chain a little bit more agile than the ones that are direct to consumer, also manufacturing, also, there's when there is an attempt from a consumer brand to go direct to consumer, we still see some challenges there. It's not like we see this completely open, easy for all of them, because the customer centricity means that you really need to have a culture of bringing data to your discovery meetings, data about what is that your consumer wants, and then how you make an interpretation of that around service design. How do you create a service for this person? And the journeys. I see, we've been talking for years about seamless journeys. There are a lot of friction points still in journeys, and what we could see was that unfortunately, with all the bad and negative things that COVID-19 brought with the lockdown and all of that, you suddenly saw creativity around technology services that they've been available for years and years and years. And I'll give you 2 or 3 simple examples. So there was a florist in the UK. They sell flowers. During COVID-19 lockdown, they thought, why are we not selling vegetable boxes then? And they've created an entire service of selling vegetables directly from the farms to consumers. And they could only serve the London area. But great idea, good usage of creativity. As we start to open and we see the fashion stores opening again, all of them have now booking services where I can book a specific time where I go to the store. So I book online to go to the store at a specific time. This is not new technology. This was completely available before, but people were not adopting. So the big change is behavior in the way you set up your projects, is thinking about creatively, how can you help your consumers to interact with you in a more engaged way, as opposed to just think about big projects that at some point will bring you the benefit. You don't know how the market will look like in 1 year. So you need to think about what are the quick wins? How can you empower your people with digital tools that help them to serve customers better? And of course, that means the store associate that for years is expected to be doing a job by looking at a POS system that was designed back in the 80s or 90s or something like that. More often than not, using their own mobile to look into things. Why are we not equipping this sales force to be digital and to run simple, right?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a lot of great points. I like what you said though. Frictionless makes for great marketecture. I use marketecture as a word because that's what we talk about when we make something very difficult sound easy, but it is actually very difficult to do. 360 customer, to do seamless, to build systems that have no friction from your service and marketing and supply chain and sales is not easy. If it was easy, we would be in a very different situation, and more companies would be able to compete on these unbelievably well-run and well-designed systems. But that's also where companies like yours need to come into play, need to come in and provide the advisory, the visibility, The common data models and customer data platforms that can connect to all the different systems that are running concurrently, provide everything from a call center to a customer on e-commerce in real time information and access to data and availability and products and shipping information in a very seamless manner. And it is done. Some companies do it very well. Some companies do it very well, and maybe it's very complicated on the back end, but the beauty is on a CX level, at the customer level, it's not difficult. And I think for most companies, that's what I always sort of say. What's first is make it really easy to the outside world. Whatever you can do, even if it's a bunch of people in the background moving the levers, don't let the customer know. And then obviously, if you can create the automation and put the tool sets in place where it's being done correctly, that's even an up level. But I think one of the worst things, obviously, of the experience that's seen to the outside world is bad. That's like the first thing I always say. You got to fix that. We got to fix bad CX in this age. So we've got a few minutes left, and I've got one more question, sort of about this the retail, and then I've got a question about kind of a broader, global effort that's going on. So you use a term, and this term's starting to gain momentum, called unified commerce. Talk to me a little bit about this. Is this a fad? Is this going to stick around, or should retailers really be getting behind this unified commerce movement?
I think so, because if you think about omni-channel or multi-channel, it tends to be centered on the channel, and that's not customer-centric enough. When you think about unified commerce, you think about commerce everywhere. You think about there's a change in the way you think about digitalizing the store, for example. You don't digitalize the store by bringing some digital into a physical space. What you actually do is you consider that the web shop can be anywhere, and that may also include a physical space. And it's about what, picking a little bit on the point I was bringing before, this idea of empowering the store assistant to be digital enough to serve customers, to have access to, a must-have in all retailers at the moment should include their workforce with a product catalog in their hands, where at least they may not have all the omni-channel services. But if you go to a store and they don't have your size, and they are not able to find your size somewhere else and ship to your home address or whatever address you give, wouldn't you be disappointed these days? It's like, really? Or if you want to return an item you bought in one store in New York, and suddenly you're traveling and you go to LA and you decide, actually, I don't want this anymore, can I return here? And nothing is connected. The systems are not connected, and they don't even recognize you as a customer. How many times have you called to a customer service agent that had to pass on to someone else who asked you the same questions again and the same questions again? And that's not useful for customers, and that's not the expectation that that retailers should be meeting these days. So yeah, definitely a lot of space for improvement here, but I think there are quick wins, and by thinking about how to best serve the customer, you are able to find those quick wins. And each case it's different. There's no two retailers that are the same. Technology may be the same. We provide technology for all of them, but the way we assemble and the way that needs to be, if there is a differentiation in a specific retailer, we should know about that, because technology can help you to broadcast your reason to exist in a wonderful way. So that's what I would like to see more discovery sessions be all about, and not trying to really boil the ocean too much in the beginning, trying to do everything. Oh, we have a digital transformation use case, so we want to bring all of these new things, not even being aware if they have the team to deliver on that. So there's so much about people and processes that counts, and this is where I think at ACP we're really good at. It's to defining those use cases, those processes, and really advise on what's the right team structure to deliver quality and innovation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of great points. I think deep down, trying to simplify your message, it goes back a little bit to what I said. All the technologies underpinning can be similar or different depending on the vendor and the selection. You work with many of them, but in the end, it's experience driven. It's that how do these companies package up all these technologies and make sure that the customer is really getting a world-class experience from the first moment they engage with the company to the completion of every sale. And then in many cases, because retail is circular, it continues on. It can't just be the end. It can't just be, oh, we had a great experience and now we're done with that person. It's how do we keep that person in the queue? How do we provide new offers, get them back into the online, into our stores, hopefully both as we start to return to more normal. And that's making sure that the commerce experience is unified. And you use that term, but then there's a few different terms out there. But I think it is important that companies or retailers are thinking about this. So you heard me say the word circular, and that sort of brings me to my final topic. I couldn't have planned that any better if I'd have tried. But one of the big kind of underlying topics in our world right now has been, CSR, corporate social responsibility, doing good for the environment. We hear about it from some of the big companies. We'll hear things about carbon neutrality and ambitious goals and big investments being made. And retail has some very large companies. What is going on in the retail space? How are retailers getting involved in circular sustainability goals that are really needing to be focused on by every industry? But since you work so closely, I'd love to hear what you're sort of hearing from the retail industry.
Yeah, I've been working closely with a think tank in the UK called Circlo, and we've ranked a group of 50, the biggest 50 companies in the world in consumer industries. So retail, CPG, FMCG, and fashion, group of companies in consumer industries. And they were ranked with regards to their ESGs, the non-financial metrics, but also digital transformation and performance, financial performance. And it was interesting to see who ranked better and why they've ranked better. So quite different profiles. L'Oreal did really well. Inditex and Nike, LVMH, and Amazon did okay, but not better than these companies. And there are a few things here that were quite intriguing. Why? I think if you look at the accounts and reports from Inditex in 2018, 2019, or even before that, they say something that I think is critical. They say every single dollar that we spend in digital transformation is towards circular economy and towards sustainability. Wow. Now, what does this mean? This means transparency of your supply chain, so you can extend the product life cycle, for example, as a business model. It's not just a program you want to have where, yeah, I take your clothes back and, we do something with it. Now, if you really extend the product life cycle, you are able to re-commerce some of these products. You're able, and recycling. Let's talk about recycling. I don't know anyone in the world who wants to put we all agree that landfill is not a good end of life for fashion products. But the reason why that happens is because the majority of recyclers don't understand what the garment is made of. Therefore, they cannot recycle it. And the same with plastics. Let's think about packaging. You cannot recycle plastic, all of the plastic. And the plastic you can recycle, not all of it follows the same process. So you need to be sure about what you're doing. So this digital identity of products, I think it's fundamental. And there are a couple of companies trying RFID tagging to create digital identity. Company like Aeon, for example, that it's doing some pilots with H&M, PVH, and Target. But we need more initiatives like this. We really need to make sure that all retailers in 2025 have transparent supply chain so that they can measure where they can measure how efficient they are with CO2 emissions, waste management, but also how they can enable business models like extension of product life cycle. So I don't think that I agree with Inditex, and I see that all the companies that are doing well and ranking well in terms of sustainability, what they're doing different from others is it's not about press releases and about innovations that you are interviewed about. It's really about this. It's digital transformation towards circular economy projects. If things are not hand in hand, those companies tend to struggle more than the others in terms of profitability as well. So there's a correlation between both things. I think as the future, in 2025, 2030, I would not be surprised if we would start seeing high taxes coming for non-sustainable products. And if that really happens, and there are some indications, particularly in Europe, that's a path that we may see happening. If that happens, then it will become more expensive for consumers to buy non-sustainable products than to buy sustainable. And that will start to bring things into balance. So some retailers already got it and are working towards that. And yeah, I think Inditex, L'Oreal, Nike, they're really good examples of what good looks like in this space.
Well, Maria, I want to say thank you so much. I have 100 more questions I could probably ask you. Fascinating stuff. It's really good to hear about what's going on from a technology standpoint. It's encouraging to see that there are consumer goods and retail companies that are really being able to jettison forward, embracing new technology, investing in the platforms that are going to give them the adaptability and scalability required to not only survive this economic challenge that we've seen in 2020, but really thrive as we sort of rise out of it. And it was also great to hear from you about the sustainability and how companies are approaching that. It's going to be a trend to watch. ESG is a popular topic. I've always said there's kind of two subsets. There's the people I believe that do it because they feel an obligation, and then there's the companies that are truly culturally evolved, and it's deeply entrenched in their DNA. And I think those are where you see the greatest and most impactful ESG and sustainability projects. Yeah. But with this, I got to say thank you, and I got to end the show. We went a little long, but I think it was worth it. I hope everybody hung in there with us. Maria Morais, SAP, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan.
So for the Futurum Tech podcast, I've got to say goodbye. But before I do, I got to ask everybody out there to please press that subscribe button, hit the show notes to get more information about what SAP is doing in this space. A couple links included down below. If you're listening to this on the podcast, also check the show notes out, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you are listening. But for this episode of the Futurum Tech Podcast interview series, I'm Daniel Newman, your host today, but I got to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us on this week's Futurum Tech Podcast, the interview series. Please be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and stay with us each and every week as we bring more interviews and more shows from our weekly Futurum Tech Podcast.